You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by Quattro Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, Real Estate Runway family. Today I have a very special guest, Mr. Kevin Mills of Streamlined Podcasts. They are the producer for Real Estate Runway, this show you're listening to right here. And we're going to talk about everything from starting a podcast to why you might want to where the industry's going, how to monetize. If you've ever thought about starting a podcast, why you'd want to do it, what the benefits are, this show is for you. And by the way, if you've enjoyed Real Estate Runway, please scroll down and give us a 5-star review. It really helps us get out to more people. We really appreciate having you listening to us every week. And from that perspective, let's jump into the show and hear from Mr. Kevin. All right, Real Estate Runway family, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sutton. I'm joined today with the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Kevin Mills of Streamlined Podcast. He's the co-founder of Streamlined Podcast. And I'm gonna let you look under the hood a little bit on our show today. This is actually the company that produces this show on the back end. They are fantastic. They have quite the process, and I'm excited to have him as an expert on the show to talk about podcasting, why it's important, things of that sort. They have produced over 7,000 podcast episodes, including every one of Real Estate Runway, and he has 7 years of experience with direct-to-consumer sales in a variety of fields, including mortgage lending. So I guess he has a little bit of real estate. We'll qualify him to be on the show with that. Kevin, welcome to the show, friend. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, and I'm excited to be here, Chad.
Yes. And first I have to just, say kudos. Your company has done wonders for this show. We automated the front end from an intake perspective, and the back end, we have hired the best in the industry. I feel like you guys do a great job producing it. So thank you. Cannot sing your praises enough. But with that being said, man, tell me about yourself. How'd you get into podcasting? It sounds like you were a mortgage lender. Let's just hear about you, and then we'll talk some meat on podcasting specifically.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, I really appreciate those kind words, Chad. We've been in business for about 2 years now, and it certainly has not been without its drawbacks. Any business owner knows that there's going to be times of when everything's like on top of the world, and then there's going to be times where, like Elon Musk says, it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And so we're really, really grateful for you being a part of our journey for quite a while now. You've been a great customer of ours, and we're very, very excited and honored to be a part of your production process each and every week. So, I just want to say thank you for letting us be a part of that. But yeah, a little bit about me and why I got into podcasting. So I've kind of always been into the whole media thing and creating online content. I made YouTube videos when I was like 10 years old. I kind of grew up on YouTube. I'm a younger guy. And along the journey, there's one story where I actually created an AM radio station for my own little neighborhood when I was 14 or 15. And so I've always been into this concept of being able to record something and then people all across the world being able to hear that. And in 2019, I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, and working as a mortgage broker. And I primarily focused on refinances with homeowners. Didn't really do a whole lot of purchase business. And so I was trying to find a way to kind of broaden my horizons, so to speak, and make sure that I wasn't pigeonholing myself into just these refinance leads that the company I was working for was giving me. And I was looking for some creative way to do marketing. And I just so happened to run across this thing called podcasting. I knew a guy named Travis Chappell who had a podcast called Build Your Network. And it was one of the largest business podcasts. And I actually knew this guy personally through something else from several years before he even got into podcasting. And so I sent him a message and I was like, hey, what you're involved in looks really cool. How do I get started? And I kind of went down the rabbit hole from there, and I started my own podcast in the fall of 2019. And it was a lot of fun. I got to interview and talk to a lot of people that I would have never had a reason to talk to before. But I kept running into some issues, and that was the back end work it took to get my podcast out there each and every week. And it was actually multiple times a week, was a lot. And as a full-time loan officer, I didn't have time to be focused on editing the audio and writing show notes and creating graphics and publishing it and all of this other stuff. So I went and looked for a solution, right? I tried hiring VAs, but then I'm just managing their schedules. And when they're sick, I got to go find someone to replace them. I tried outsourcing it to an agency, but the rates were absolutely ridiculous. Kind of the average going rate at that time was $800 to $1,000 an episode. And I just didn't feel like that was a reasonable rate for what was being done. So at the time, I was in a mastermind for podcasters. I found 3 other guys that were having the same issues that I was, that had a variety of success in other areas in their life. And I was like, hey, let's put our brains together. Let's figure out how to solve this problem. Let's start a company to make this easy for podcasters. And that's how Streamlined Podcast was born.
I love it. Not only did you find a new passion, but you saw a need and, capitalize on that need. And so it's a fantastic thing you guys came together to do. So a lot of our our listeners, on this show are investors in some capacity. Some are business owners, some are professionals, and some are just really outspoken people, So
Right.
Just curious from your perspective, I feel like I know the answer for Quattro, but why is it that a business or an individual even would even want a podcast?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that question is going to depend on who you are, to be quite frank. But I think I can quite safely put it into a couple of main buckets. The first bucket would be for an individual. Big takeaway for an individual to have a podcast is it gives you a reason and an excuse to talk to people that you would never have a reason or an excuse to talk to previously. And I think that can be really powerful for someone that's just trying to make a name for themselves and create a brand. Because otherwise, why are they going to take a call with you? Whereas it's been very rare I've had someone decline taking the time to do a podcast interview with me. So I think that's really, really powerful for individuals. For businesses, especially small businesses, I think one really powerful thing about podcasting is that it's basically like, so even if you don't have a really big audience, it's basically like showing up to a conference each and every week and speaking with 100, 150, 200 dedicated and engaged people that listen to your entire 60-minute presentation or 30-minute presentation or however long your episodes are. And that's something that, you can't really make happen with a post on Facebook. And so that's really powerful because you're able to kind of communicate things about your business, and you can almost let your customers or your future prospects even experience what it's like to work with you through these podcast interviews. And we see that can be really effective as a marketing play. And then just for larger corporations, I would say at this point, everybody's got a podcast. And if you're not creating spoken content for your company, there's another company in your industry that is, and they're getting all of those customers. So it's a matter of, do you want to miss out or do you want to be a part of what's going on? Because radio's dying and podcasting is coming to take its place.
I think I would agree with everything you just said there. And from a personal perspective, why did Quattro Capital, who you're listening to here with Real Estate Runway, why did we start a podcast? One thing you said there is you get the opportunity to talk to people about things that you probably never would otherwise. This has actually been a source of learning, even for someone, like me and like Quattro, who is in our industry and a big player. we've had some people on this show that have helped us uncover new financial strategies. We've had interest rate experts. I mean, just people you see and they're out there, but you'd never really get their time, to have a one-on-one conversation for 30 minutes if there wasn't something in it for them, and airtime is good for a lot of these people. And then one thing I don't think we talked about really at all, and I'm sure we'll touch on the impact of this in the how to start a podcast phase we're about to go into. The SEO that comes with this, and search engine optimization, the presence, just being searchable for your company, having content out there like this, audio and video content on social media, via Google, it's all hitting right now. And so any sort of content you have out there, when people go to look at you or look for you, it helps you be discoverable. We found that as a huge benefit to putting this show in place. So I couldn't agree more. So transitioning a little bit, Kevin, this is okay. Let's say I've decided I would really like to start a podcast for myself or my company, or just to assert my opinions, whatever it is. What does it take to start one? Like, where do you even begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So technically, the barriers to entry for podcasting have really been obliterated versus 5-6 years ago. At this point, you can go to a place like Anchor, that is a podcast hosting platform that's owned by Spotify, and you can create a free hosting platform there, absolutely free. You can download a recording application on your iPhone, plug in those free wired headphones that came with your iPhone, and you can record a podcast and then publish it through Anchor, submit it to iTunes, and boom, you have a podcast. Okay. The question is, how does that podcast differentiate itself from the millions of other podcasts that are on iTunes and Spotify? So what most people really mean when they ask, how do I start a podcast? Is how do I create a professional looking podcast, right? And so to do that, there are quite a few steps. You need to edit your audio. And as a part of editing audio, there's a bunch of different steps, but I'm not even going to get into all of that. You need to create some engaging show notes that not only provide SEO opportunities, like you just mentioned, but additionally kind of engage listeners and get them to potentially listen to an episode that they might not have listened to based on the title alone. Then you need to create some graphics for that episode, and that way that you can promote it on social media, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. You need to get listeners to that episode some kind of way, because a lot of people kind of have the misconception that they're going to create a podcast and that iTunes or Spotify is going to get them listeners. That's quite simply not the case. iTunes and Spotify is nothing like YouTube or TikTok. There is no fancy algorithm for podcasts that feeds you the best content for you to listen to. That's coming. It's very, very close, but it's not here yet. So right now, we still have to drive people to our podcasts. And so you need to create some kind of social media assets to be able to promote that, whether it's a normal graphic, an audiogram, a video bite. And then if you're recording the video for the podcast, not only do you need to record it, which you could use Zoom or Riverside, which is a really great tool to use for that as well. Some people take it a step further and use DSLR cameras or mirrorless setups. But then you'd need to do the video editing, and then you'd need to publish that to a destination. So, and those are kind of the highlights of what it takes to really start a podcast. And all of that information is 100% readily available and free out there on Google. If you type in, how do I start a podcast? You're going to see hundreds of guides. And I guarantee you 95% of them, if you just start at the beginning and go all the way through, they'll get you to the finish line. What I found, though, that happens a lot of times is, since there's so much information out there, and a lot of podcasting is subjective, meaning whether you choose Libsyn as your hosting platform or Anchor as your hosting platform, at the end of the day, it's not going to make that much difference. But people will sit there and they'll mull over it for months at a time. And so what we've really focused on in our company is trying to make it as simple as possible and remove those choices, so to speak, and just present easy options, right? And so what we've created is something that we call the Pod Box, and that's going to give you all of the physical tech that you need to sound professional. So like I said, you could record with your headphones from your iPhone, but at the end of the day, it's not going to sound as good as some of the podcasts out there. If you want to sound professional, quote unquote, you're going to need at least a USB microphone that you can use to kind of isolate some of the noise that's going on behind you. And so this pod box that we've created, it includes all of the physical tech. You're going to get a microphone. It's actually the one I'm using in this episode. You're going to get a boom arm that attaches to your desk. That way you can move it around wherever you want. You're going to get headphones to isolate all the noise going on around you. So you're literally going to have every piece of physical tech that you're going to need. And then we're also going to give you access to our team to help you out with the digital side of things. So we're going to create cover art for you. That's the picture that shows up on all the different podcasts and iTunes. We're going to design that for you. We're going to create that custom intro and outro that introduces and exits each and every episode. We're going to provide your hosting platform. We've partnered with Libsyn to be able to provide their professional services to our clients. And then we're also actually going to edit your first 4 episodes for you for free as well. And as a part of that editing package, we're taking care of the audio, we're creating show notes, we're creating those graphics that can be shared on social media, and then we're scheduling and uploading it to your hosting platform as well. So this pod box literally encompasses everything you need to start your podcast, as well as kind of manage it for the first 4 episodes. And it's only $497. So it's really affordable when you're looking at everything else out there on the market. And we'd love to actually give one of these away to your audience. So in the show notes, there'll be a link that they can click on and they can register there to win. We'll give one away to your audience. And keep in mind, we're not trying to collect your information to mass market spam you or anything like that. There will be a box you can check if you want us to reach out to you. But if you don't check that, we're not going to email you unless you win. And we think the pod box is going to be a great solution for those people that are kind of just stuck on which mic should I buy? Which hosting platform should I buy? Don't worry about that. Get this. It takes care of everything for you. We've helped lots of our clients already kind of eliminate all of those obstacles by using the pod box.
I'm laughing a little bit because I'm kind of like, where was this when I started the podcast? But, you guys have clearly been growing, evolving, and just encompassing everything, streamlining the process, right? But, that's fantastic. I mean, I think even when we were starting the podcast, you at least had an article out there and it was like, hey, here's the recommended gear. Here's a couple of things you need to do from an album art perspective. And I'll tell you, what did you say that value is? $499 of that box?
Well, that's the price. I would not say that that's the value.
The value is much more than that, because I'll tell you, I'm not going to throw numbers out because I'll look foolish, but what we paid in startup costs was a lot more than that.
So I've got 3 co-founders in this company. There's 4 of us in total. Every one of us spent at least $10,000 getting our podcast off the ground. But we spent more than that, to be clear. But that was the minimum price.
For sure. So, and you've been doing it longer than I have. It was more streamlined when I got there, but excuse me, my watch, my partner is the only one who can get through to me. And it looks like he called during that time. Anyway, that is something, we weren't quite that high, but we were definitely above $500. That's a fantastic value. Folks, jump on that. And I think the other part that I'll add in here on what it takes to start a podcast, what Kevin is talking about here is from recording and forward. And he's even helping with, now they're helping with the startup portion, which is actually the, getting the gear, getting your hosting platform set up. All that stuff sounds foreign. I promise it's not that difficult, but there's so many options. You just need help choosing what is best, what's going to work seamlessly. You don't want to be moving content 6 months from now. But the other part of it is, and we're all at a little bit of color, is getting guests on the show. right? I mean, what we're talking about here is the back end, and everything it takes to produce a show. But what about just getting the right people on the show and managing bookings and all that kind of stuff? There's a lot of articles out there as well. And, if you want to check out an example, Kevin has told me to throw this out there, so I will. Go to thequattroway.com/podcast and just walk through our intake process. And if you actually want to be on the show, come on. If you're listening, we welcome you to come on the show and talk. But we have automated entirely the front end of the process. You don't want to be handling, calendar invitations. You don't want to be handling reschedule notices. You don't want to be chasing people down for their headshot. You set all this up in a process on the front end. Pay for the tools that are needed, like Calendly, like a ClickUp, whatever it is that you use to intake the information, and get that off your plate. Get the back end off your plate. I mean, would you agree with me that I saw a stat somewhere around 85% of podcasts never make it past 50 shows or something like that? Or 85 of those that are started.
It's way more staggering than that. The majority of podcasters never make it past 7 episodes.
Wow. And the reason is they have that I'm a mentality. They're trying to do, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And they realize, wow, this is a full-time job, or at least like 10, 20 hours a week just to get a podcast produced, So put aces in your places, hire the right people. This is why I brought Kevin on here, because I've had a lot of questions on, hey, how do you run a podcast? You know what? I'm going to bring a guy on and let you guys talk to who I use. So anyway, off my soapbox, Kevin, go into the next 2 topics we have here. I'd love to talk about, so let's say we started a podcast, we've hired Streamlined, we've put, we've gotten a pod box, we've gotten our setup going. We're at like 50 or 100 shows. How do you then explode that listener base? How do you grow? How do you, dare I say, monetize a podcast? What does that roadmap even look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and I really think there are 2 different questions, to be clear. You can monetize a podcast without having a huge audience. So I want to be very clear about that, and I'll come back to that. But the majority of the way people think about monetizing a podcast is kind of the no-brainer, right? Getting ad dollars or sponsorship. And that does work, and it is some of the highest rates in the industry, CPM rates in the industry. But with that being said, there's a lot more effective ways to monetize a podcast. Just to give you an idea of advertising rates, basically on average for every 30-second ad that gets 1,000 downloads is going to run anywhere between $25 to $35, depending on kind of the deal you make and who you're going through. If it's a more niche thing and the advertiser is very much, targeted into that niche, you can typically get a lot higher of a CPM, $50, $60, something like that per 1,000. But you do the math there, it takes several thousand downloads just to kind of cover the cost of your production if you're only looking at it from a sponsorship standpoint. So with that being said, the easiest way I've seen people monetize their podcast is by finding a way to help it feed your main business, right? So if you're a real estate developer, and obviously there are multiple different kind of roles inside of that, but depending on what you're doing, maybe the one thing that you need is you need more capital. You need more people to invest in your deals. If you had more people investing in your deals, you would just hockey stick. Maybe that's your problem, right? Well, then I would probably set my podcast up to be interviewing people that have the capital to invest in my deals. And then I'd be having those interviews, and they would basically be like little prospecting calls that they would have no idea were prospecting calls until the end of this interview, after I'd spent 30 minutes or an hour getting to know this person. Then I'd follow it up with, hey, so I'm actually working on this deal, blah, blah, blah. Wondered if it makes sense and if it'd be something that you'd be interested in looking at, right? And maybe I'm doing 3 or 4 of those interviews a week. I'm in front of my ideal avatar, so to speak, And imagine what that could do for my business over a couple of months time frame of doing that consistently, right? And I can tell you it's going to do a lot for your business because I've seen several people implement some variation of that and run very successful 6 and 7 figure businesses doing so. The second way, if you don't want to tie it into your main business, so say you're a software developer and you've got a podcast about mountain climbing, right? It's kind of hard to tie that together. My suggestion would be to create some sort of product that you can sell to your audience. And a product can be a variety of things. It can be a mastermind. It can be a course. It can be an actual product. It could be merchandise. It could be a donation campaign. It could be a private community that you're able to kind of join. The audience can join the host when they're interviewing the guests. I mean, there's so many different ways you can get creative with quote unquote monetizing your audience. And when you start to really get creative with it, you'll find that, hey, I don't need thousands of listeners to begin to repay my cost of production and make this worth my time and effort. A lot of times you'll find you can do that with 150, 200 really loyal listeners. So that's the monetization piece. Real quick, I'll just touch on the audience piece. There's a lot of ways to tackle this, but the biggest, best takeaway I could give you is podcast listeners listen to podcasts, right? So how do you spend more time on more podcasts? How do you spend more time being interviewed on other podcasts that have your ideal listeners listening?
And I think that third one is probably the lowest hanging fruit you can go after, right? And what I'll tell you as a podcaster, and you can tell me if you agree with this or not, I love when people reach out to me and ask for an interview or book an interview through our website, which is where I send them. It's less work for me to go find people. If nobody wanted to, like, I haven't had to look for somebody for the podcast in a very long time, right? We're fortunate in that. And if people know about us, they find us, they come on our website, they book an appointment, and it's great. And we have very quality interviewees on the show. But if you're having to also go find people, it's extra work. So don't hesitate to reach out to podcasters and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show. I can talk about XYZ, or whatever you think, and people are usually willing to do that as long as you fit in their niche, right? I mean, if you're trying to sell toilet paper and you're going on a mountain climber podcast, that probably won't work.
Yeah,
right? But
exactly. And there's actually a couple of services that have made this pretty easy.
Yeah.
My favorite is Podmatch. From the perspective of what you're talking about, of like kind of swapping back and forth. Podmatch,
that's what it's called, right?
That.
Yeah.
Podmatch is kind of like Tinder for podcasters, basically. Yeah. And it's a really great tool to use for that. There's another tool called Guestio, which is also great for guesting or for finding guests for your podcast. It's not quite so much geared towards getting on podcasts, but Podmatch is a great resource for getting on podcasts. I mean, I believe there's over 20,000 podcasters that are using that right now.
Fantastic. Well, we've talked a lot about, why a podcast is important for your business. We've talked about how to start a podcast, how to grow and possibly monetize a podcast. Where do you see podcasts going? I mean, I've heard some people say, I wouldn't start a podcast today. There's too many of them. Well, yeah. I know there's a funny stat when you compare that to the number of YouTube channels out there. But anyway, I'll lob that softball up there for you. Where do you see this industry going?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So the the whole, there's too many podcasts out there or whatever. I love hearing that because I mean, if you look at the podcast compared to YouTube channels or even blogs, oh my word, there's hundreds of millions of blogs out there, and people are still creating new blogs each and every day. Just because there's a lot doesn't mean that they're going anywhere anytime soon. But with that being said, podcasting is definitely the most undersaturated medium for all forms of, or all major forms of online creation. And it's really not that new, to be honest. I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe it was quote unquote invented in 2007. So you're looking at roughly 15 years or so it's been around, but it really didn't kick off until about 3 or 4 years ago. And there's a lot of kind of speculation as to why. I heard a reason a couple of months ago that made so much sense to me, and I've kind of accepted it as fact at this point. But you know, I think a lot of this has to do with where have people historically listened to radio shows? They're listening to it in their car while they're commuting to work or wherever they're going. Up until the last 3 or 4 years, it's been kind of difficult and clunky to be able to listen to a podcast while you're driving, right? Because they didn't make vehicles with native Bluetooth capabilities. And some of them even have native podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify players built in now straight from the factory as well. But that really wasn't super commonplace 4, 5, 6 years ago. And the ones that they were in were brand new vehicles, and it kind of takes a while for that to kind of get into culture and for people to sell their old car and to buy a new one and so on and so forth. But now that's started, and we're starting to see the data reflect where you can see traditional radio listenership is going on a very steep downhill starting in about 2018-ish, and podcasting is going on a very steep uphill trend starting in about that same time period, and there's no reason to believe that that's gonna let up for any reason whatsoever. So to anyone listening that's saying, it's too saturated, there's no way I'd start a podcast now, okay, great, you're gonna regret it in a couple of years, that's fine. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. That's a saying that my old boss used to say, and I love it. And yeah, we'll be here when you're ready, though, and we'll be here to help.
I love that philosophy, and I've never really thought about that. But yes, that's probably exactly what's happening. That's a good theory. I mean, just myself, all of my content. There's my family right there. All of my content comes off this device right here. It's Bluetooth connected. I put it on my magnet thing in my truck, and that's where all my podcast, music, whatever I listen to comes from. So totally get that. Wow, Kevin, I could talk to you all day, man. This is super interesting stuff. I've lived a lot of this, so that it's kind of second nature to me. I really hope any of you who are looking to start a podcast, give my boy Kevin here a call. I would, I could name probably 10 other podcasts you've heard of in the real estate space that they produce. So I didn't find them by accident either. They're probably the best in the business out there. They are. Anyway, I'm going to step over and talk about the couple of questions we like to ask everyone on the show. So you're not going to get exempt from this one. And by the way, your contact information, I'll ask you for it at the end, but I'm going to just presume that without me even having to say a thing, you're going to make sure they're in the show notes since you're producing the episode.
That's correct. Correct. We'll make sure that everything is in the show notes as far as how to get a hold of me. Really, at the end of the day, the best thing to do is it's going to be to go to our website and hit contact us. And more than likely, you're going to end up talking to me. If it's not me, it'll be one of my partners, and we'll get you fixed up.
Fantastic. And I believe so we'll get to this in just a second. All right. First of the 4 questions, Kevin. So what would you say is your superpower as it relates to your business?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think my superpower is figuring out problems.
Problem solving is
a problem
skill
solver
and an art. I love that. All right. We've heard a lot of reasons today why you're a pretty cool dude and you're pretty interesting and awesome, but man, give me a little dirt. What is your biggest failure or mistake in business or life? And what did it teach you?
Oh man,
either he doesn't have one or too many are coming to mind. I'm not sure what it is. We'll see.
No, it's too many. It's hard to pick. Okay, I'll give you my best one, I think. So at the beginning of 2020, I bought a contracting business and didn't really do all of my due diligence as well as I should have, and ended up really losing my face on that. And yeah, I learned that, hey, there's a reason it's called due diligence.
The two most important and expensive words in real estate and
Yeah.
business, right there, mic drop. All right, fantastic. I almost said green light. I've been listening to that Matthew McConaughey book, Green Light, and every time he tells a story, it's like he gets to the end, the punchline, and goes, green light, So anyway, that'd be more of a red light, I suppose. I digress. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, I know you guys have a couple of free books, and we kind of alluded to the free gift. Maybe you can mention it again, where people can find that in the show notes and what they are.
Yeah, for sure. So there will be 3 different links in the show notes. One of them will be this book that we call The Easiest Way to Start a Podcast. It's got everything that you need to know about starting a podcast. Nothing you don't need to know. It's about 40 pages long. You can read it on a plane ride. The second link will be for what we call our Podcaster's Companion Guide. So if you've already got a podcast, this kind of helps you with some best practices, some podcast affirmations, as well as a journal that you can use when you're interviewing folks. And then that third link is going to be where you can go to register to win a pod box for free. And again, if you want us to reach out to you to let you know how we can help, just check the little box. Otherwise, we won't.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And last question here. As you all know, Quattro is based on 4 pillars, one of which is philanthropy. I love to let our guests, or I invite you to share with our listeners, rather, what is your philanthropic venture of choice? A lot of times we see people, will support alongside you on your behalf. So if you had to choose, or just explain what your chosen philanthropy venture is in life, what would that be so that we can support with you?
Yeah, so it's called Best Friends Animal Society. It's based out of Kanab, Utah. And it's a really, really great organization that focuses on giving animals a second chance. And they do it in a very, very good way. I mean, I've been to a lot of different shelters, and I'm always kind of disgusted a little bit when I look around. This is a place that, I wouldn't mind hanging out for a while. And I think that's really cool. And I'm happy to be able to support what they do.
That's awesome. I love that. And again, that will be in the show notes, folks. Don't feel like you have to write this down while you're driving. We've done it for you. Well, Kevin, this has been a hugely impactful, insightful, and just all around fun episode. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Thanks for all you do for us and for this show and for friends of Quattro who have their shows as well. So really appreciate you coming on and can't wait to do it again.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway Podcast.